Father, I killed someone. The words cut the confessional silence as a cold blade. They were not shouted. They were not cried. They were whispered, but they carried the weight of an eternal condemnation. 23 years serving God in this church. 23 years listening to sins, secrets, blames that destroy souls. But never something like this had crossed that carved wood grid with sacred symbols that now seemed to watch me with accusing eyes. The night was especially dark. It was Tuesday, almost midnight. The altar's candles fluttered as if they were presenting what was coming, their flames dancing in a macabre choreography that projected elongated shadows on the stone walls. The smell of melted wax mixed with the damp odor of the old stones and the sweet perfume of the latter funeral, widened lilies created an atmosphere, heavy, as if the church itself knew that something unholy was about to be revealed within its sacred walls. The wind howled outside, making the old stained glass shudder in their lead frames. Each gust seemed to whisper warning that I should have heard. Every tremor of the colorful glass should have warned me of what was coming. I was about to close the confessional when he arrived. Slow steps, hesitant. I heard the main door of the Ranger Church, a sound that I knew well, but that night carried something different. The steps echoed on the irregular central nave, as if he stopped every few meters to reconsider. When he finally came to the confessional, he heard him deeply breathe outside, like a man about to dive into deep water. The door was slow when he entered, every inch a battle against himself. When he finally knelt across the grid, he remained silent for long minutes. Only his irregular breathing cut the void. Deep inspirations followed by shaking exhales like someone trying to control an internal panic. I could feel your presence through the wooden grid. There was an energy, disturbed, emanating from him, as if it carries something so heavy that it distorts its own air around. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I started the standard prayer, my voice echoing gently in the confined space. Father, he interrupted me. The voice was an adult man, perhaps 40 years, but polite. There was a slight accent that I could not identify, but there was something childish in the tone, like a lost child in the dark, calling for help that fears not deserving. I need to tell something that is killing me inside. God listens to all sins, my son, and forgive those who truly repent, I answered, using the words that comforted thousands of souls over the years. But this time, they sounded insufficient, as if the words lost strength even before crossing the grid. I betrayed my wife, he started, and there was a break in his voice that made me squeeze my eyes. I sighed internally. Adultery, common sin, unfortunately. Painful for all parties involved, but not uncommon. In 23 years of priesthood, I heard this confession hundreds of times. I prepared to hear another story of human weakness, of overcome temptation, late repentance, and tears of guilt. But then, he kept talking. It was not only once, Father. There were many, with the same woman, for 2 years. His voice became lower with each word, as if he feared that even God could refuse to listen, as if the echo of the church could report it to the outside world. I thought he exaggerated in caution, until I realized something strange. He was not confessing as someone who sought forgiveness. I was confessing as someone who sought relief, as someone who carried a weight for so long he had forgotten what it was like to walk without him. Tell me more, my son. Complete confession is the first step to acquittal, I encouraged, although a part of me already sensed that this would not be a common confession. It's married too, he continued, and now her breathing was faster. I was able to hear his hands stirring nervously, perhaps playing with some object. There are 2 young children, a 7-year-old girl and a boy of 5. There was a peculiarity in the way he mentioned the children, not as a man who felt blame for destroying a family, but as someone who, he had memorized these details, as if they were important in a way that they did not understand yet. Her husband, he found out, he continued, and now there was something new in his voice. It was no longer just to blame, it was anticipation. I don't know how, but found out. Long pause. Very long. I was able to hear the wind outside intensifying as if nature itself reacted to what was being revealed. And then, I asked, feeling a growing tension in the air, like electricity before a storm. So I did something terrible, Father, something that changed everything. It was at this moment that the words echoed in my mind like a dark omen. He spoke in a low voice, as if the echo of the church could report it. I thought it exaggerated until it pronounced a forbidden name. What I heard that night accompanies me in silence, and was never told outside. How could I know at that moment that these words would become prophetic? How could you imagine that what you were about to hear would pursue me for years, changing my way of sleeping, of praying, looking at people at Sunday Mass? How could I predict that confession would become a permanent shadow in my soul? "Continue, my son," he said, although my voice was already carrying a hesitation I could not hide. Her husband came to my house. It was a Thursday night around 9 o'clock. My wife had traveled to visit her sick mother, would be out for a week. I was alone. He stopped again. I heard the sound of his hands shaking, or perhaps his knees hitting the confessional's wood. There was a rhythm in this tremor, like an anxiety morse that teleged its inner state. He didn't touch the doorbell. He knocked on the door. 3 slow knocks like a code. When I opened, he was standing there with a strange smile on his face. Strange how? As someone who discovered a secret that made him both furious and relieved, as if finally understood something that had bothered him a long time ago. The confessor paused to swallow hard. I could hear his saliva down his throat. He didn't come to fight, Father. He came to talk, to try to understand, to maybe find a solution. Something cold descended by my spine. The way he said solution did not sound like reconciliation. It sounded like an euphemism for something much darker. We entered the house. We sat in the living room. I offered coffee, whiskey, anything. He accepted only water, ice water. The confessor laughed softly, a humorless sound. I remember the noise of ice cubes beating the glass. It was the only sound in the room. And then, so he showed me pictures, photos. He took a wallet out of his pocket and started spreading photographs on his coffee table, his and his wife on his wedding day, of the young children playing in the garden, holidays at the beach, birthdays, Natal. The confessor's voice began to break, but there was something rehearsed in emotion, as if he had told this story before, to himself, many times. And you know what was worse, Father? He was not angry. He was not screaming or threatening me. He was simply destroyed. As a man who had lost everything and didn't know how to keep living, I remained silent, but I felt my heart accelerating. There was something in the narrative that did not fit perfectly, like a symphony played half a tone below than expected. He told me stories about each photo, as he met his wife, the first date, the first time she said she loved him, the day she discovered she was pregnant with her first daughter. This must have been painful to listen. It was. But it was also strange, Father, because as he spoke, I realized he knew things about me, things she should never have told. My breath became more superficial. What kind of things? He knew about the scar on my right shoulder. I knew I was afraid of height. I knew about the recurring nightmare I have since childhood. His voice now carried a genuine perplexity. Intimate things. Things you only tell someone who really loves. And then, it was then that he asked me a question that I will never forget. What question? He leaned forward, looked at me through those photos scattered on the table and asked, "Do you love her more than me?" The confessor soaked softly, but there was something more than tears in that sound. Was there relief, excitement? And God forgive me, I looked at all those photos of happiness, a perfect family, true love, and said yes. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the weight of the words hanging in the air like a toxic cloud. The candles on the altar seemed to shake more intensely, as reacting to confession. What happened next? I asked, although part of me no longer wanted to know the answer. He stood for a very long moment, looking at the pictures. Then, very slowly, he began to collect them and keep in his wallet, except one. Which? The wedding picture. He left her on the table, turned to me. I felt a shiver through my whole body. Then he put his hand in his jacket's right pocket, said the confessor, and now his voice was so low that I needed to lean to hear, and took a small key from Urata. A key? The key to her apartment. He put her on the wedding picture and said in a completely calm voice, "So she's yours now. Take good care of her, because I'm not going to be here anymore to do that." My throat was dry. "Father," he whispered, and now there was something in his voice that made me hold on the arms of the chair. "Tell me, my son." He got up, walked to the door, and before leaving, he turned to me one last time. His breathing was almost inaudible now, as if the following words were too heavy to be pronounced in a normal voice. And then he pronounced a name. My blood froze. A name I never imagined he knew. "What name?" I asked, although part of me already feared the answer. The name of the person I really killed 5 years ago. The words were suspended in the air as toxic smoke. I felt my breath fail for a moment, as if oxygen had been sucked from the confessional. 23 years listening to confessions and I had never felt pure evil emanating through the wood grid in this way. The temperature in the confessional seemed to have fallen several degrees. I could feel the cold sweat dripping down my forehead, contrasting with the suffocating heat I felt in the chest. The candles of the altar, visible through the small crack of the door, shook more intensely now, as reacting to the presence of something that should not be on sacred ground. "My son," I started, but my voice came out like a hoarse whisper. "You're telling me that—" "What, did I kill someone before?" "Yes, Father. And her husband. Somehow he knew." I could hear him moving on the other side, restless. the sound of fabric scraping against wood as if he could not find a comfortable position to carry the weight of what he was revealing. There was also a low rhythmic sound, his nails hitting something hard. Nervousness or impatience? How could he know? I asked, trying to keep my voice pastoral, but feeling it shake on the edges. This is the question that has plagued me 3 days ago, Father. Since that Thursday, I haven't been able to sleep more than 2 hours in a row. He laughed softly, but it was an empty sound. My wife thinks I'm sick. It pretends to believe when I say it's just work. He paused a long break, and was able to hear him repeatedly swallowing, as if he tried to keep something inside his throat he wanted to leave. There was a strange cadence in his breath, too fast for someone at rest, but too controlled for someone in genuine panic. Do you know what is most disturbing, Father? During these 3 days, I began to remember details I had forgotten, little things that at the time seemed insignificant. What kind of details? When he said the name, Marcus, I felt like the floor was disappeared under my feet. But then, when I could recompose myself, I began to remember how he spoke. Marcus. Now there was a name. Names make everything more real, more concrete, more impossible to ignore. I closed my eyes and tried to prepare for what was to come, but I knew that nothing could prepare myself properly. Like this? He didn't say Marcus as someone who has just discovered information. He said as someone who knew Marcus in person. A shiver traveled my spine. There are moments in confession when you realize that you are about to enter much darker territory than you initially imagined. Tell me about Marcus, he said, although every fiber of my being wanted to finish this confession right here. Marcus was, it was my partner. He corrected himself twice, and that hesitation among verbal times made me shudder. It was as if Marcus existed in a boundary state between life and death in his mind. We had a financial advice company, small, but profitable, very profitable. The confessor stopped again. This time, I heard a sound that took me a long time to identify. Was he laughing? A low humor laugh like someone who discovered a cruel joke of fate. In fact, it was more than profitable. We were diverting money from some customers. Nothing very elaborate, just small adjustments here and there, transfers that seemed legitimate on paper. Then it started to draw a picture. Financial fraud, murder, adultery. This man was revealing layers of sin as someone peeling a rotten onion, each layer more fetid than the previous one. How did it work exactly? Simple. We had access to customer investment accounts. Small amounts, never more than 2 or 3% of the total, were transferred to ghost accounts. To customers, we showed slightly less than real profitability. They were pleased. We were rich. There was a technical coldness in the way he described the fraud that made me realize that he was not read and owe with someone who stumbled into the crime. This was someone who planned meticulously. And Marcus? He was equally involved? At first, yes. The idea was his, in fact. Long pause. Marcus was brilliant with numbers. I could make these adjustments so that no auditor would find out. At least, not easily. But has something changed? Marcus started to get nervous after 2 years doing this. He said he was very risky, that we should stop. His voice has been harder now, less broken, but I didn't want to stop. The money was addictive, and more than that, I already had plans for that money. What kind of plans? Plans involving his wife. The central piece of the puzzle finally turned out. It wasn't just about money. It was about possessing the complete life of another man. Were you already having the case with her while you were partners? No, not yet. He paused, and when he continued, there was something that sounded almost nostalgic. But I was already watching. The way she smiled when Marcus talked about the business. How proud when he bought expensive gifts for the children. How she blindly trusted him. There was something deeply disturbing in the way he talked about observing Marcus's family, as a predator studying his prey. So Marcus wanted to stop. He gave me an ultimatum. Either we stopped immediately and returned everything, or he would report to the authorities. And you agreed? Of course not. The answer came too fast, without hesitation. I had invested too much in that life to simply give up. I could feel the tension growing across the grid. There was a different energy now, less guilt and more justification. As if he were rehearsing a defense he had repeated to himself hundreds of times. We marked to meet in our cabin on the lake. It was owned by the company, registered as a place of corporate retreats. Specific details again. One Saturday, very early in the morning, I arrived first around 6:30. Why so soon? Because I needed time to prepare myself mentally. The way he said mentally preparing made me feel nausea. It was not the preparation of someone who expected a difficult conversation. It was the preparation of someone who had already made a decision. Marcus arrived around 7:30. I was nervous, sweating even in the cold of October morning. I brought a brown leather paste, I remember every detail, with all the documents that proved our adjustments. Did he want to deliver everything to the authorities? Worse than that, Father. He wanted me to deliver it all. He said that if I did it willingly, we might get a deal. Penalty reduction. that we could rebuild our lives later. The way he said feather reduction carried a disdain that made me feel even more nausea. And you agreed? I pretended yes. I said he was right, it was time to take responsibility. Another laugh without humor. Marcus was so relieved that she almost cried. She hugged me, said she was proud of me, that I knew I would do the right thing. I closed my eyes, feeling what would come next. There was something obscene in the way he described Marcus's confidence, knowing what he had planned. I offered coffee. He accepted. We sat on the cabin's deck, looking at the lake. It was a beautiful morning, priest. The sun rising behind the mountains, some birds singing. The water was perfectly calm, like a mirror. There was something obscene in the way he described the tranquility of the moment, knowing what was coming. It was as if the beauty of the morning was just a scenario for its betrayal. Marcus began to talk about starting over after everything was over, maybe starting a clean business. He said his wife would support him, that his children would eventually understand. Long pause. Talked about teaching the eldest daughter to ride a bicycle without wheels, about helping her son with the school science project. Your wife, the woman I was obsessed with, yes, he corrected. Because it was not love yet, Father. It was possession. I wanted everything that was his, the house, the family, the perfect life. The pieces began to fit my mind like a macabre puzzle. Marcus was married to the woman the confessor wanted. Marcus discovered the deviation of money that he would allow confessor to compete with his lifestyle. Marcus wanted to do the right thing. You killed your partner, who was married to the woman for whom she was obsessed. Yes. The word came out as a sigh of relief, as if finally having someone who understood the situation were one weight less. And it was surprisingly easy. The coldness in his voice made me shudder, as the cabin's deck was about 2 meters high. Underneath, pointed stones we used to make the fire shots of the company. His voice was clinical, detailed. Marcus was on his back to the edge, gesturing while talking about the future he would never have. I felt a chill down my spine. I got up, as if to get more coffee in the kitchen. I walked until behind him. He kept talking, looking at the lake. My God. He didn't even notice. He was so excited talking about starting his life that he didn't hear my steps approaching. Long pause. Loaded. I put both hands on his back and I pushed it. The silence that followed was disturbing. There were no tears. There were no sobs. Just a disturbing calm, as if he were describing something completely banal. His body made a terrible noise when he hit the stones, how like thick branches breaking, or bones. My mouth was completely dry. I tried to swallow, but there was no saliva. And then, so I waited. 5 full minutes, Father, observing to make sure he didn't move. The clinical coldness was back. Then I called the emergency. I said I had gone to get more coffee inside the cabin, and when I came back, he was no longer on the deck. He should have slipped and fallen. And did they believe? Why wouldn't they believe? Marcus had drunk beer the night before with some friends. They found alcohol in his blood. The deck was wet in the morning dew. Accidents happen all the time. There was a subtle satisfaction in his voice that made me realize that he was not just dealing with someone who had committed a crime. He was dealing with someone who had enjoyed every moment of planning and execution. The widow? Was she devastated? Completely destroyed. For months she called crying, asking if I was sure it was an accident, if I had seen anything that could explain what happened. Pause. If he said something before, leave. And was it when you approached? I was her friendly shoulder, the business partner who understood her pain, the man who was present in the last hours of her husband's life. He laughed again, and this time there was a disturbing satisfaction in the sound. 3 months after the funeral we were in bed. 6 months later I had moved to her house. I felt a disgust wave so intense that I had to hold on to my chair. And for 2 years you maintained this relationship, knowing you had killed her husband. More than that, Father. For 2 years I comforted her tears when she dreamed of Marcus. I held her hand when we visited the tomb every Sunday. I helped her children with the homework. I read stories to sleep. It was as if he were describing someone else, so disconnected was of any sense of morality. And she never suspected? Why would I suspect? I was the perfect man, attentive, affectionate, present, all that Marcus was, but better. The arrogance in his voice was palpable. I knew every tear of her, every fear, every hope, because Marcus told me everything when we were partners. But something has changed. You broke up. She met another man, Carlos, according to her. His voice got harder. Said I was ready to move on to find true love. There was a cruel irony in the destination. He had killed to own this woman, just to lose her to another. And did it bother you? I was enraged, Father. I had sacrificed everything for her. I had planned every detail to be together, and she discarded me like, as a phase. But back to that Thursday, I continued, trying to understand the connection. Her current husband mentioned Marcus's name. How did he know? This is the question that plagues me, Father, because not only mentioned the name, my blood froze. What else did he say? He said, The confessor's voice shivered for the first time since he started talking about the murder. He said Marcus told me everything before he died. Impossible. Marcus had been dead for 5 years. I had just heard the detailed confession of his murder. This is impossible, I muttered. That's what I thought, but then he took something out of his left pocket. What? A digital recorder. Small, silver, the kind that journalists use, and said with a terrible calm, "Do you want to hear?" I felt as if the world had stopped spinning. Did he have a recording? Not just a recording, priest. His voice now carried pure terror. He squeezed the play, and I heard Marcus's voice, Clara, as if he was in the room with us. But that is, his voice saying, "If something happens to me, it was Daniel. He's planning to kill me to be with my wife and the money. I'm recording it as safe if my fears are confirmed." My heart has stopped for a complete moment. "Daniel," I whispered. Now I knew the confessor's name. And then, Father, while the Marcus's voice kept talking, detailing our financial schemes, describing my obsessions for his family, he looked at me in the eye and said something that made me realize that I was in danger much greater than I imagined. What did he say? He said, "My name is not really Carlos Daniel. My real name is..." Long pause, accelerated breathing. "My real name is Detective Marcus Silva Jr." The world collapsed around me. 23 years as a priest and had never felt evil in its purest form by crossing that wooden grid. It was not just evil. It was revenge. It was distorted justice. He was a son charging his father's death in a way that challenged all human logic. I felt my heart stop completely for a moment. Then, when he beat again, it was as he hammered against my thoracic box hard enough to break ribs. My hands, backed in the arms of the chair, began to tremble uncontrollably. The cold sweat that had begun on my forehead now dripped in the back, soaking the cassock. "Marcus's son," I whispered, more to myself than for him. "The 5-year-old boy you read stories to sleep, Father. The little boy you helped with the math homework. The son who called you, Uncle Daniel, and who asked when you were going to marry Mom." His voice had completely changed. It was no longer the broken voice of someone confessing sins. It was the cold, controlled voice of someone who had planned every word, every pause, every revelation with surgical precision. It was the voice of a man who had expected 20 years for this moment. At that moment, the words of my own mind echoed as a prophetic curse. It spoke in a low voice, as if the echo of the church could report it. I thought it exaggerated until it pronounced a forbidden name. What I heard that night accompanies me in silence, and was never told outside. Now I understood. He didn't overdo it. He was running a 2 decades in construction, and every whisper, every pause, each revelation was carefully positioned pieces in a board that I didn't even know I was playing. "My God," I muttered, feeling nausea going up his throat. "Do you remember, Daniel? Do you remember how I was a confident child? How did you run to hug you when I got home from the kindergarten? How did my father see from heaven when I got a math account?" Each word was a sharp blade cutting through any illusion that I could have about the nature of this confession. It was not a man seeking forgiveness. He was a predator revealing his trap, and I was the prey I had walked voluntarily into her. I remembered. God forgive me, I remembered every moment he described. The blonde boy with blue eyes who trusted me completely. That saw me like a hero, who did not know that the man who put him on bed every night had killed his father. "How did you know?" I asked, although part of me no longer wanted to know the answer. "I never stopped suspecting, Father. Even at 5, I knew something was wrong. I could hear him moving on the other side, but now the movements were different. It was no longer the nervous gestures of someone confessing. They were deliberate, controlled movements, as someone who was in charge of the situation, as a detective conducting an interrogation. A 5-year-old cannot know. When this child wakes up every night for months with nightmares about his father falling. It can when this child asks his mother why Uncle Daniel knew exactly where to find medicine in the bathroom closet the first time he visited our home. Details. He was remembering details that an observant child could have noticed, but that an adult would assume that they would go unnoticed. Children are like small natural detectives, absorbing inconsistencies that adults ignore. When this child listens to his mother crying on the phone with you 3 days after the funeral, saying, "Thank you for taking care of everything. I don't know what you would do without you." I felt a chill down my spine. Children watch everything, absorb everything, and sometimes they keep everything to use 2 decades later. When this child notices that you know the exact recipe for her father's favorite chocolate cake, even though he has never been in our kitchen before his death. More details. Small inconsistencies that accumulated in the minds of a traumatized child until it formed a suspicious pattern. But a child's suspicion is not proof, I managed to say, trying to find some logic to grab me. "No, but a hidden recorder in my father's office is." My blood fell completely. I felt like it was hit by lightning. "What?" "My father was paranoid, Daniel. After he began to suspect that you wanted more than just continuing your scheme, he started recording all conversations. All, even those you thought were private. This is impossible. I searched his office later. I stopped. Confession had made me admit something that I should not have admitted. I fell into the trap like a complete amateur. After Daniel? After killing him? The silence that followed was deafening. I had fallen into your trap with pathetic ease. 20 years as a priest, accustomed to conducting confessions, and was being manipulated as a child. Continue, he said, trying to recover some control of the situation. The recorder was hidden inside a fake book on his office bookcase. Ethics in Business. My father had a peculiar sense of humor. He laughed, and now there was a coldness in the sound that made me tremble. After the funeral, when my mother was organizing his things, I convinced her to let me get some books, to remind me of Dad. And you found dozens of hours of recordings, business conversations, discussions about deviations, your fantasies about our family, and the most important, he stopped, letting the suspense turn in the air like toxic smoke. Every second of silence seemed to last eternity. What? The last conversation he had with you, on Wednesday before you met in the cabin. My breath was superficial. I vaguely remembered this conversation. Marcus had called me late at night, insisting that we needed to talk personally, that he had something urgent to tell me. His voice was strange that night, tense in a way I couldn't identify at the time. In this conversation, my father told you exactly what he suspected, that you were obsessed with our family, that he was afraid that you could be able to get what you wanted. He couldn't know. He knew why you were not as careful as you thought, Daniel. He saw you watching our house in the early hours. He saw you following my mother to the market. He saw you photographing our family during the company's picnic. Each revelation was like a punch in the stomach. Marcus had realized things that I thought were invisible. I'd been so arrogant, so confident in my discretion, and more than that, said Marcus Jr., and now there was a cruel satisfaction in his voice. He knew about the letters. My blood froze. What letters? The letters you wrote to my mother, but never delivered. My father found 3 of them in his office when he went there to get some documents a week before he died. How could I have forgotten the letters? I wrote my fantasies about a life with her, about how we could be happy together, how I would take better care of children than Marcus. I thought I had all destroyed them, and at the end of this recorded conversation my father said something that changed my life forever. What? He said, Daniel, if something happens to me, I'm sure it was you, and if you think you'll get my family that way, you're very wrong, because my son is smarter than you think, and one day he'll find out the truth. I felt like a kick on my chest. Marcus had predicted everything. He had left a message for his son as a kind of prophetic will, and the worst, he was right about his son. So you grew up knowing? I grew up planning, Father, planning how to honor the promise I made to my dead father when I was 10 years old, and finally understood what those recordings meant. The temperature in the confessional seemed to have fallen even more. I could see my own breath forming small clouds in front of my face. Or maybe it was just my imagination reacting to the horror of the situation. What a promise, that I would make you pay, not just for the murder, but for the way you violated our family later, by the way you slept in my father's bed, by the way you pretended to love me while I knew you had become orphaned. There was a deep and raw pain in his voice now, mixed with a cold determination that made me realize that he was dealing with someone who had dedicated half of his life at this moment. How did you plan all this? Years and years of preparation, Daniel. First, I graduated from criminology. Then I joined the police academy. I became a specialized detective in cold cases. I learned about investigation, about criminal psychology, how to make people confess without realizing that they are being interrogated. The irony was cruel. I was being questioned by a child who had seen me as a substitute father, who was now a man specializing in capturing people like me. And your mother? Do she know who you are? My mother thinks she found true love with a man named Carlos Silva, a kind and attentive man that the court drew for months, which made her feel special, who convinced her to marry in a small registry last month. Did you deceive your own mother? I saved my mother from living a lie, Daniel. She spent 5 years romanticizing your relationship, thinking that you really loved her, thinking you were a good man who appeared in your life at the darker. There was a distorted logic in his reasoning that made me realize that he had justified every horrible action as an act of justice. Now she has what has always deserved, someone who truly puts her first, someone who doesn't see her as a trophy won through murder. And tonight is the final confession, Father, the moment you admit everything officially, so that I can finally close my father's murder file and move on with my life. Are you recording this? Long silence, very long. He could hear only the wind outside and the distant sound of our breath. This question will be answered in a few minutes, Daniel. But first, I need you to tell me about the other person. My blood froze again. As if the horror wasn't enough, there was another layer of nightmare waiting to be revealed. What someone else? The person who helped you kill my father. The world stopped completely. How could he know? I had never told anyone. I had never left clues. There was never— I don't know what you're talking about, I lied, but my voice trembled like a leaf in the wind. Of course you know, because you didn't push my dad alone, Daniel. Someone was waiting under the deck to make sure he was really dead. Someone who checked the wrist and confirmed that the work was over. How could he know that? No one had seen it. No one could have seen it. And that person— his voice got lower, more dangerous. This person is still alive, and he is here in this church right now. I felt my world collapse completely. It wasn't just about me. There was someone else involved, another life that would be destroyed by this carefully orchestrated revenge. More than that, Daniel, this person is someone you trust, someone who has access to church anytime, someone who suggested that you come to confess tonight. Words reached my mind like bullets, each drilling a different illusion about my life, my security, my reality. I felt the world spinning around me, as if the church itself is collapsing stone by stone. 23 years of priesthood, and I had never felt so small, so vulnerable, so completely in the hands of forces I could not control. No, I whispered, a desperate denial, then a statement of fact. Yes, Daniel, and you know exactly who I'm talking about. And I knew, God forgive me, I knew, there was only one person who fit this description, a person who knew my schedules, who had church keys, who had insisted that I would come tonight to make peace with God, a person I had completely trusted in the last 5 years. Father Miguel, I muttered, feeling like I was pronouncing my own death sentence. Bingo. The word echoed in the confessional as a shot. Simple, cold, definitive, as if Marcus Jr. were checking an item on a list he had carried with him for 2 decades. Father Miguel Herrera, my mentor, my confessor, my only true friend in recent years, the man who welcomed me when I arrived at this parish, pierced by guilt and seeking redemption through service to God, the man who helped me rebuild my faith after I thought I had lost it forever, the man who was present that morning in the cabin, hidden between the trees, ensuring that Marcus was really dead. How did you know? I asked, although part of me already feared the answer. Because I saw him, Daniel. I was there. The blood in my veins became ice instantly. This is impossible. You were 5. I had run away from home that morning. My mother and father fought the night before. Because of him, I discovered later. He had told her about his obsessions. She didn't completely believe, but the doubt was planted. I vaguely reminded me of that fight. Marcus had come tense at the meeting, mentioning that things at home were complicated. I had used this as another justification to do what I planned to do. I woke up early and decided to go to the cabin. I knew you would be there because I heard my father making plans on the phone. His voice became lower, farther, as if reliving memories buried for decades. I wanted to try to make up between you both. I thought if we talked together, everything would be solved. I felt nausea rising through the grave, an innocent child trying to fix a world that was already condemned by the adults around him. I arrived too early. You had not arrived yet. I hid behind the big trees near the lake, planning to appear by surprise when you were talking. And then I saw you arrive. Then my father, I saw you talking on the deck. Long pause, loaded with pain. I saw you get up and walk until you are behind him. My breath was superficial. A 5-year-old child had witnessed the exact moment when I became a killer. I saw you push it. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heart beating like a war drum, each beat echoing in my ears. And then I saw someone else emerge from the trees across the cabin. I closed my eyes, knowing what would come next. A black man's man. A priest who ran to where my father had fallen and verified if he was really killed. Father Miguel, my accomplice, my savior, my condemnator. Why was he there? I asked, although I knew that the answer would only make everything worse. Daniel, you really don't understand, don't you? A feeling of panic began to form on my chest. What do you mean? Father Miguel had known my father for years, long before you showed up. They were regularly to talk about business. The world began to crumble around me in a completely new way. What business? The church needed funds, Daniel. Reforms are expensive. And Father Miguel knew exactly how you were getting extra money through the company. I felt like it was hit by lightning. Was he blackmailing you? Not exactly blackmail. More like a rate, a regular contribution to the church's charity works. Marcus Jr. laughed, but it was a completely devoid of humor. 20% of all your deviations. A very generous tithing, don't you think? This is impossible. Father Miguel suggested that you kill my father, Daniel. It was he who planted the idea in his head during those conversations about morals and temptation. He was the one who said that sometimes God requires extreme sacrifices from us. Each word was like a slap. I vaguely remembered these conversations, but at the time they looked like abstract philosophical discussions about ethics and morality. He manipulated me. You both manipulated. The difference is that he was better at this than you. I could feel tears forming in my eyes. Tears of anger, betrayal, pure humiliation. I had been a pawn in a much larger and darker game than I ever imagined. And after you killed my father, Father Miguel took full control of the diverted backgrounds. You received crumbs while he funded a very comfortable life with the blood of my family. How do you know all this? Because I have spent the last 10 years investigating every aspect of this conspiracy. Each bank transaction, each meeting, every lie. Your voice got harder. And because Father Miguel has begun to feel guilty in recent years, a shiver came down by my spine. What does that mean? It means he started looking for someone to confess, someone who could trust, someone who understood the gravity of what had been done. And he found you. He found Carlos Silva, a psychologist specializing in religious trauma. At least that's how I introduced myself when I started attending the therapy he secretly offered to priests with problems of consciousness. The ingenuity of the plan left me speechless. Marcus Jr. had infiltrated Father Miguel's life, just as he had infiltrated his mother's life. For months he told me everything, every detail of the plan, every moment of guilt, every nightmare he had with my father falling from that deck. And you recorded everything. I recorded everything. Father Miguel's hours and hours of confessions admitting his role in the murder of my father. I felt like you're choking. The air in the confessional seemed to have become too heavy to breathe. And tonight, Father Miguel thinks he's outside praying for his soul as you confess with me. In fact, he's being arrested right now by a team of detectives that I brought with me. The sound of distant sirens began to echo through the walls of the church, confirming their words. You see, Daniel, I didn't come here just to hear your confession. I came here to close this case once and for all. You're really a detective, Sue, and this is officially a police operation. Long pause. Which means everything you said here tonight can and will be used against you in court. I felt the world disappearing completely under me U.S. feet. It wasn't just revenge, it was justice. It was the legal system functioning through a child who became his own strength of nature. The recordings, they are admissible in court. Confessing to an acting police officer, even if disguised, is completely cool. And your mother? My mother will find out the truth tonight. That the man she loved for 2 years killed my father. That the priest she trusted to advise us during the morning was the accomplice of the murder. There was a deep sadness in his voice now, mixed with the satisfaction of the revenge fulfilled. She will be torn. She will be free. For the first time in 20 years, she will know the complete truth. And then you can decide how to move on. The sirens were closer now. He could hear heavy steps outside the church, voices speaking of police codes that could not completely decipher. Daniel, Marcus Jr. said, and for the first time since the beginning of this confession, there was something almost kind in his voice. Yes? Before they come in to arrest you, I need you to know one last thing. What? During all these years, even knowing what you had done, part of me still missed Uncle Daniel. The way you made me laugh, the stories you told, the way it made me feel safe. I felt tears running down my face. That was the hardest part of this whole plan. Accepting that the man I loved as a second father was the same man who had taken my true father of me. The church doors opened with a crash that echoed through the stone walls like a sacred thunder. Police voices cut the silence of dawn. Incomprehensible codes mixed with the sound of heavy steps walking through the central nave. The altar candles were violently translated with the cold airstream that invaded the sacred space, as if even the divine light reacted to the desecration that had occurred between these walls. But I remained motionless in the confessional. Arrested for Marcus Jr.'s last words, there was someone else. There was still someone more involved in this web of lies and murder that extended 20 years ago, like a disease that spread throughout the decades, contaminating every life that played. Who? I whispered, though I knew that our confession had come to an end. Daniel. His voice became lower, almost inaudible amid the sounds of the police operation. Who do you think you gave me the church keys tonight? Who do you think you knew exactly which confessional you would use? Who suggested I was dressed as a common civilian? My blood fell completely. No, it couldn't be. Not after all that had happened. No more betrayal, one more revelation that would destroy the little left of my understanding of reality. My God, Sister Helena always knew, Daniel. From the first day, she was cleaning the church that morning when you came back from the cabin. See the blood on your shirt. See the panic in your eyes. See you meet Father Miguel on the altar to plan the funeral. Helena, sister, the elderly nun who had been taking care of the church for over 30 years. The woman who welcomed me when I arrived, pierced by guilt and seeking redemption through service to God. The person who trusted me most throughout the parish. The woman I considered a second mother, who prepared soup when I was sick, who prayed with me on difficult nights when nightmares prevented me from sleeping. The woman who had observed in silence as I pretended to be a man of God, knowing exactly what kind of demon I really was. Did she know? She always knew, and she always waited for the right day for justice to be done. Police voices were closer now. I could hear someone by calling my name, instructions being given about arrest protocols, the metallic sound of handcuffs being prepared, but everything seemed distant, as if it were happening in another world, in another dimension, where I was not the protagonist of this tragedy. It was she who found me 5 years ago when I was still just a young police officer starting in the profession. It was she who told me she was sure my father had been murdered. How did she find me? She has never stopped looking for me, Daniel. Since I left the city at the age of 18 to study criminology, she has followed my career, my life, waiting for the right time. Pause loaded. Helena's sister was more determined than any detective I've ever met. He could hear steps approaching the confessional, male voices discussing strategy, someone mentioning my name and clerical position with a tone that mixed professional respect and personal contempt. The sound of justice approaching after 2 decades of patient waiting. It was Sister Helena who planned all this. The approach with my MA9, the infiltration in the life of Father Miguel, this confession tonight. Marcus Jr. took a long break, and when he continued, there was genuine admiration in his voice. She is incredibly intelligent for a 70 nun, and incredibly patient. I tried to process the information, but my mind was overloaded. Helena's sister, the woman who prepared breakfast for me every day for the past 5 years, who asked about my health with maternal concern, that prayed with me in difficult times when guilt became unbearable, which comforted me during the crises of faith that hit me in the lonely dawn. She had orchestrated all this elaborate revenge. Every smile, every prayer, every word of comfort had been part of a 2 decades plan under construction. Why did she wait so long? Because she wanted to be sure. I wanted me to be professionally prepared and emotionally. I wanted justice to be complete and definitive. Her voice carried an admiration that bordered on reverence. And because she wanted you to live with enough guilt to truly understand the weight of what she had done. The words echoed in my mind as funeral bells. 20 years carrying this weight, thinking it was just my conscience tormenting me. Sleeping nights, recurring nightmares, moments of panic during masses when he saw happy families in the congregation. In fact, all this was part of a much larger plan, a carefully calibrated psychological punishment. She told me once, said Marcus Jr., God works in mysterious ways, but sometimes needs human instruments to execute his righteousness. She saw herself as one of these instruments. I closed my eyes, trying to process the magnitude of manipulation. Sister Helena was not just an accomplice of revenge. She was the architect, the mind behind everything. A woman who dedicated 2 decades of her life to ensure that justice was done, no matter how long it took. Daniel, the voice came from outside the confessional now. Official, authoritarian, with the coldness of the law. Father Daniel Morales, go out with visible hands. I closed my eyes for a longer moment, trying to find some inner strength to face what was coming. But when I opened them again, I realized that Marcus Jr. had risen from the other side of the grid. I was able to hear the sound of their professional and determined movements. The time has come, Daniel. Marcus, I started, but I didn't know how to finish the sentence. What do you say to the child you helped create, knowing you had killed her father? What words are there for a moment like this? My name is Detective Marcus Silva Jr., Special Case Unit. Her voice was now completely professional, devoid of any trail of the intimacy we've shared in recent years or even in the last few hours. And you are arrested for the murder of Marcus Silva, mister. I heard the confessional door opening by his side, steps moving away with decision, voices giving protocols, someone confirming legal rights, family sound but distant from a prison being performed with bureaucratic accuracy. I remained sitting for a few more moments, absorbing the magnitude of what had happened. It was not just about justice or revenge. It was about a destroyed family who had found a way to rebuild himself through the truth, no matter how painful the process was. It was about secrets that corrupt souls until they are exposed to light, even if this light burns everything around. It was about the fact that some wounds never heal, they only become determined. Father Daniel, the voice came from outside again, more impatient. Last warning. I got up slowly, feeling the weight of each of my 52 years. Each movement seemed to require immense effort, as if my body was reluctant to cooperate with what my mind knew to be inevitable. I put my hand on the door handle of the confessional door and stopped for a moment. At that moment the words echoed in my mind with terrible clarity. He spoke in a low voice, as if the echo of the church could report it. I thought it exaggerated until it pronounced a forbidden name. What I heard that night accompanies me in silence, and was never told outside, but now it would be told. Now everything would be revealed. The silence that protected me for 2 decades was finally coming to an end, and I was finding that there was a difference between confessions that frequent and condemn confessions. Mine was definitely the second type. I opened the door. The light of the police lanterns blinded me momentarily, as if it were the first time I saw Rael loose after years living in the shadows. When my vision adjusted, I saw at least 6 officers waiting for me, his weapons pointed down but clearly ready. Marcus Jr., going among them, now wearing a police vest that said detective in bright yellow letters. But what caught my attention most, what made my heart stop completely, was the small and curved figure near the altar, Helena's sister. She was standing between her candles, her wrinkled hands interwoven in prayer, but her eyes watched me with an intensity she had never seen before. There was no hatred on them, there was no triumph, there was not even satisfaction, there was only relief, as if a weight she carried for decades had finally been removed from her fragile shoulders. And there was something more in her eyes, something that made me realize that, despite everything, despite the betrayal and manipulation, she genuinely cared about me. Not with the killer I was, but with the lost soul I became. "Hands behind the head," ordered one of the officers. I obeyed, feeling the cold metal of the handcuffs involving my wrists. The sound of the click was definitive, final, as the last page of a book being closed. As they led me through the central nave of the church, I passed Sister Helena. She said nothing, but made a little sign of the cross toward me. It was not a blessing, it was a forgiveness. When we arrived at the main door of the church, I turned back one last time. The light of the candles danced on the stone walls, creating shadows that seemed silent witnesses to everything that had elapsed. The confessional where I spent the last 2 hours revealing my worst secrets was empty now, but somehow seemed to echo with the weight of the pronounced words. This church had been my house for 5 years. It had been my refuge, my sanctuary, my atonement place, and now it would be just a memory, a closed chapter in a life that was about to be completely rewritten. The cold dawn wind hit my face when we went out for the parking lot. Several police vehicles were parked with the flashing lights, turning the church facade into a red and blue kaleidoscope. Some neighbors had woken up and watched at a distance, whispering with each other what could have happened to justify a police operation in a church in the middle of the night. As they placed me in the back seat of one of the vehicles, Padre Miguel being escorted from another car, he seemed to have aged 10 years in one night. Her gray hair was unkempt, her cumped cassock, and there was an expression of complete defeat in her eyes. Our looks crossed for a moment through the glass, and I saw in them the same defeat that I knew how to be reflected in mine. 20 years of shared lies, 20 years of divided guilt, 20 years of secrets that corrupted our souls until there is nothing but empty shells pretending to be men of God. And now, finally, the silence had been broken. The car began to move, taking me away from the only life I have known in the last 2 decades. While the church disappeared in the rearview mirror, I thought of Marcus Silva Mister. I thought of the man I killed by a toxic mix of greed and obsession. I thought of the family that I destroyed with a single movement of my hands. I thought of the 5-year-old boy I became an orphan, and how this same boy grew up and became the instrument of my own condemnation. There was a poetic justice in this that not even I could deny, a cruel but appropriate symmetry. I closed my eyes and, for the first time in 20 years, began to really pray. Not the mechanical prayers that had repeated thousands of times during masses. Not the empty words I used to comfort others while my own soul seized, but a genuine prayer, born of pain and real regret. I didn't pray for forgiveness. I knew I didn't deserve it. I didn't pray for mercy. I understood that my time for this had been a long time ago. I did not even pray for a second chance. Some actions cannot be undone. Some damage is permanent. I prayed for the soul of Marcus Silva Mister, so that he had found peace, wherever he was. I prayed for the family I destroyed, so that they could somehow find healing after all this revelation. I prayed that the boy I helped create could finally find the peace that spent half his life looking for. And I pray that my own soul, corrupted by decades of secrets and lies, could find some form of redemption in the remaining years. Even if it went after the bars of a prison. The city's lights began to appear as we approached the police station. In a few hours, this would be headline in local newspapers. In a few days, it would be the subject whispered on every corner of the city. In a few weeks, it would be replaced by other scandals, other tragedies, other dark stories. But for me, for Sister Helena, for Marcus Jr., for his mother, for Father Miguel, this story would live to semper end, because there are events that mark the soul so deeply that they become part of our essence, impossible to forget or overcome. The car stopped in front of the police station. I can hear voices outside, preparations being done, legal procedures being started. In a few minutes, I will cross those doors, and my life as Father Daniel Morales will reach the official end. What comes later, God only knows. But before that, I allowed myself a last moment of reflection on what I had learned tonight. For 23 years as a priest, I heard thousands of confessions, large and small sins, light and heavy guilt that crushed souls, secrets that released hearts and secrets that imprisoned them forever, redemption stories and condemnation stories, but no confession was more revealing than my own, because I found that the most dangerous man in a confessional is not the one who comes to confess his sins, no matter how dark. He is the one who listens, secretly judging, carrying his own even darker secrets, pretending to be the intermediary between the sinner and God, when in fact he is just another sinner running away from his own condemnation. The door of the car opened, bringing with me the sound of reality returning. "Come on, Father." I got up and walked toward the police station, knowing that I would never be called again by this title. The weight of the handcuffs in my wrists was nothing compared to the weight that would carry in my heart for the rest of my life. That night I closed the confessional door for the last time, but the words pronounced there, both mine and his, will pursue me to the last of my days, and maybe that's how it should be. Perhaps this is true justice, not just the legal punishment, but to carry the full weight of what we did forever. Never forget, never be allowed to forget. As the police station's doors closed behind me, I realized that some confessions never really end. They only migrate from one heart to one, from one generation to the next, carrying their secrets through time until the truth finally finds its way to the light. And when this happens, when silence is finally broken, there is no return. It only remains to accept the consequences and try to find some meaning in the pain we cause and the pain we feel. Because in the end, that may be what makes us human, our ability to carry the weight of our actions, even when this weight threatens to crush us completely.